My name is James Philip Hogan. I went by Phil Hogan most of my life. I didn't know about my first name till I went in. They wanted first name, middle initial, and I almost had to write home to find out what my first name was. But I was at Chapel Hill when I joined, and I was in the middle or the beginning of my sophomore year and enlisted in Raleigh. And they decided to call, we were in the reserve, and they decided to call all of us in. And there were about 100 of us from Chapel Hill that went down from Raleigh on the same train and got to Miami Beach. I remember I wore a gray flannel suit, blue shirt and a tie, and we got down there and they ran out of uniforms. So I had to wear that gray flannel suit and this shirt for 3 or 4 days before I finally got a uniform. But we got basic training in Miami, and then we were sent out to various schools throughout the United States. And I wound up at Slippery Rock State Teachers College in Slippery Rock, Pennsylvania, which is a great area of the country in the Shenango Mountains, and was a lot of fun up there, and attended class in weather and physics. As a matter of fact, I got credit for the physics when I got back to Chapel Hill after the war. And from there to Nashville, Tennessee for classification, and then to Maxwell Field in Montgomery, Alabama for really like officers training school. From there I went to primary flying school in Arcadia, Florida, Door Field it was called, and flew the Stearman aircraft, and my instructor looked exactly like Wallace Berry in the movie guy and was about as mean. He could take the stick and beat your knees pretty good with it if you did something he didn't like. But it was a great experience, and this flying the Stearman was a lot of fun. From there I went to Bainbridge, Georgia for BT-13 and mainly night flying, where they killed a few cadets every day, every night. And from there to Albany, Georgia for advanced and the AT-10. In the second half of advanced, they had B-25s to come in, and we got about 40 hours in a B-25 in the left seat as a pilot seat, and where we did night formations and that sort of thing. All the way through, I had asked for A-20s to be my aircraft, and I was picked to go to the A-20 school in Charlotte, North Carolina, which was nice. And they had 2 of them, one in Florence, South Carolina, one in Charlotte. And we flew out of there and out of Myrtle Beach. Myrtle Beach was air-to-ground gunnery, and they had a range set up on the beach. They used German prisoners of war to set the targets up. And after getting it was really combat training. Had a range to do air-to-ground gunnery in some place in South Carolina. I don't remember where it was. It was a flight pattern you got in, just strafing. But then after that we got a 10-day leave, and I came home, and after about 5 days I got a telegram to report to Florence, South Carolina immediately. And we went down to Florence, and they had a new aircraft called the A-26 Invader. And it was a beautiful airplane. It's kind of like the A-20 in that it was twin engine, but it was more powerful and had more armament, and the engines were Pratt & Whitney engines, which were a lot different than Wright Cyclone engine was. After getting the training there, you didn't have a co-pilot seat. My instructor was a colonel, and he sat in a little jump seat. And we were down there about 2 weeks, and then we're ready to go overseas. and we flew out of Savannah, Georgia, the southern route, which went to Puerto Rico, to Belém, Brazil, to Natal, Brazil, to the Ascension Island, Firestone rubber plantation, Dakar, Marrakesh. Then into England, we went into Blackpool. And from there, we went to Paris and to our permanent base in a little town called Crépy in France, which was close to the Belgian border. And it was a 409th Bomb Group in the 9th Air Force. Your first mission is a real experience when you see flak for the first time. And we had when I was in advance, we had a instructor in advance that liked our group and had enough of instructing, and he asked if he could go out with our group into combat, and they let him go. And he was from Salt Lake City. His name was Hatfield. He was shot down on his first mission, and I have pictures of him and pictures of his airplane. It was shot down, took the whole wing off his airplane. That was the most harrowing experience I had, I guess. But anyway, I flew 29 missions from like January of 45 till the beginning of May of 45, and the war was over. We regrouped to come back to the States and came back as a group, and flew down to the French Riviera and across to Marrakesh, and my aircraft was leaking oil, the engine was leaking oil, and they decided it needed a new engine. And I didn't want to wait while they found an engine, so they let me hitch a ride, but they gave me a receipt for the aircraft. It was $1.5 million that I had to bring back to the States that shows what happened to my airplane. And we came back into Savannah and then back into Goldsboro. I flew 29 missions. I had some flak hits, but no personal injuries at all. Coming back to Goldsboro, they asked us about going to Japan, and they tried to talk some of us into it, and I kind of acquiesced at some point to going to Japan, but then the war was over in Japan. So I said, let me out, and they said, well, I had enough points to get out. With you got an air medal for every 5 missions, so I had an air medal in 4 oak leaf clusters. And that was 5 points a medal, so that helped some. But anyway, I was home. I had bought the only car in Graham from Foster Hughes, who sold me his wife's car while she's standing on the porch screaming and hollering. And they said, you better get back down here, they're going to let you out. So I drove back to Goldsboro, and they got my discharge. And that's about it.
That's pretty much the story, huh?
Yeah.
Well, it's been a very interesting story too, Phil. I curious about something I ask many people, and that is, what did you pick up in the service, in your service time, that's lasted for a lifetime? And did you meet any special people? And did you learn any special traits, characteristics, or whatever that have been basic to you in your life and the lifestyle you lived?
Well, when I first got back, I flew some. I flew rented aircraft over at the airport, and I had never been up in an aircraft when I joined the Air Force. And Dover Fogelman at the old airport married my daddy's cousin, and I to join the Air Force. And I went over and I said, "Dover, I'm in the Air Force, but I've never been up." And he said, "Come on." So he took me to ride. But how to get along with people, I guess, is because you meet strangers all the way through, and so you need to be able to get along. And the training in the Air Force was very pleasant, and I enjoyed it. The combat was not pleasant, but it was an experience, and I'm glad that I did it. I wouldn't want to do it again. As a matter of fact, I was still in the reserve during the Korean War, and they were flying the A-26 in Korea. And I had become a CPA, so I went down to Raleigh to the reserve office and said, I want to change my MOS number from flying officer to auditing officer, and they did it. So I didn't have to go. But some of my friends were called back in. Phil Mass was called back in, and some others that I don't recall their names right now, but in the Korean War. So I could have been called back in because I was still in reserve, had not been discharged at that time.